Hello and welcome to Ditching Hourly. I'm Jonathan Stark. Today I am joined by guest Lucy Flores. Lucy, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you for having me.
To get started, could you let folks know a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Lucy Flores, and I am a design strategist dedicated to advancing equity in the food system. So what that essentially means is I help organizations that are tackling strategic, programmatic, and other types of challenges and help them identify impactful solutions through equity-driven design.
Interesting. Equity-driven design, is that a term that you made up?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it essentially means facilitating a design thinking process or a human-centered design process. So for folks who are unfamiliar with that term, it essentially means a creative problem-solving approach. And it's been used for a long time in design fields. And, in recent years, increasingly, it's a problem-solving approach and design approach that's being applied to the social sector as well. So in terms of applying this equity lens to it, it's, human-centered design and design thinking is, I guess you could say it is, a niche or it's an area. And applying the equity lens, while that's happening increasingly, I think, among designers, it is still relatively emergent in the mainstream way.
Okay, so you didn't make it up, but it's a specialization inside of a specialization.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
So sort of a subset or a particular lens on human-centered design.
That's right.
Okay, that's good. Is there a lot of demand for that? What kinds of companies are wanting equity-driven design as I would call it a horizontal specialization. It's like this capability or a talent or skill that you have, and I'm going to guess that you're passionate about it because otherwise, why would you pick it? And but correct me if I'm wrong. So you've got this overlap between something you care about and you're passionate about and something presumably you're good at and you can execute really well. We've already got overlap between two circles in a Venn diagram. The third circle would be, not to put it too bluntly, but who cares? Like, who really wants that really, really badly?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. I'll also add that the other sort of element of focus is within the food system. So sort of taking the conversation in that direction just for a moment, I'll come back to answer your question. There's a number of consultancies that do human-centered design and even equity-centered design work in the world. I think IDEO is probably the most well-known that works as a global consultancy, does that exact same type of work. And generally, consultancies do apply this approach to a broad set of challenges. They're an example of a company that works on both, the for-profit side. They do product development, for example, as well as the social sector side. They might develop services and, global health, for example. And there are some designers that are niche in certain areas. I do not know of any individual designers or sort of soloists working in the food system with this lens. So I just want to add that as sort of the other element of focus. In terms of the need, is it there? So I came from an organization that I worked for 10 years and spent a lot of time engaging with other food system organizations who seemed really energized by this particular approach and were really interested in it. I think it's become kind of like a hip, sexy thing in certain fields, I would say. I think problem solving, hiring consultancies to help address strategic challenges or to help design programs or for services. There's no shortage of that's in need. I think for me, in thinking about positioning, it's largely about how to introduce the idea of this approach to solve a problem that folks might look at other solutions for, if that makes sense.
It does, yes.
So there are a lot of consultancies that exist in the world to help solve some of these challenges or to take advantage of opportunities. But this is one approach that I think is a really great one that you could use that some folks might not know exists.
Okay, great. So to make this, for folks who are listening and maybe aren't super familiar with, I think you've used the word food systems a couple times. Can you instantiate that into something specific? Like, what's a food? Who runs? Is Procter and Gamble a food system, or is factory farming a food system, or fishery?
Yeah,
what's a food system?
It's all connected to the food system. So it's what keeps food, growing. It's if you think of it as like a chain, you have food that is, grown. When we think about agriculture, it's grown, it's produced, manufactured, and then it needs to be distributed. We're reading a lot about that in the news with supply chains, of course, needs to be distributed. And there's a lot of sort of like organizations like in between all of these sort of touch points, of course.
Okay. So you mean you just mean the broader like global food system. Okay. Mm-hmm. So who are some companies, what are some typical companies that people would be familiar with at different parts of the food system? Maybe like some brand names that people would be familiar with. I mean, is it just every Stop and Shop and Starbucks or is it more specific?
Sure. Yeah. You could think of really any of those places and they'd be accurate. When I think about the type of work I'm interested in, it can range. So for example, I'm really interested in the idea of redesigning, how food programs work in hospitals so they can be more aligned with health and healing and more inclusive of the patient population. That's an area of the food system that I'm really interested in. So I come from an institutional food background in a way. Okay. So I think that's really interesting. I also think, food challenges related to food waste. Food waste is enormous in the U.S. and there are different opportunities to address food waste, whether it's at an individual company. I mean, you could be at a huge, large corporation that produces food and there's solutions for addressing that there at that scale and that level. But there's also the level of for consumers, like sell-by dates, for example, on food is incredibly confusing and it's a known issue. That's like a really interesting design challenge. How can you change sort of public understanding and public perception of the food that they bring home so that it doesn't contribute to the enormous amount of waste that exists? So for me, it's less about companies and individuals. It's more about the issues and the challenges that they're experiencing.
Right. I get that. And I'm hearing that. I want to find a business though. So like a business, you need a business to pay you money. So what are some of the businesses that most attract you? In other words, like what kind of clients in that, because it's huge, it's enormous. Like the space, now that I understand what you mean, it's ginormous. So, I started to feel something cool in the hospital space. So maybe a hospital is your client. The sell-by dates are super interesting. Who cares? Like who wants to write a big fat check to pay you to fix that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Okay, so I see what you're getting at. I'll share a couple of examples. So one that is, without getting into specifics, that I'm probably going to be writing up a proposal for is a food association that has member companies that are part of that association. And that association is interested in diversifying its membership. It has a pretty homogenous membership and perhaps hasn't been taking an eye towards equity and the role it could play in actually increasing the number, like the diversity of not just members in their association, but the number of people who actually just work in that field, right? That could eventually become members of their association. That's a very real example of something that I'm probably going to write a proposal for.
Okay. So trade association. So if I was going to take that to a different industry, it'd be kind of like the American Medical Association saying, too many old white guys on the board here. We need to do something. We want to do something to make it more inclusive and equitable. Is that sort of a parallel?
Yeah. So for me, it would be understanding probably well, what are the barriers, right? That's the first question for people who are interested. And are they interested?
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. And, you're writing a proposal. So, you've clearly spoken with the people and there is a desire to spend money to address what they see as a problem. So that's good news. Right. Yep. And is that, let's actually zoom out for a second. We'll probably be zooming in and out quite a bit. If we zoom out business-wise for you, what's your biggest challenge?
Biggest challenge business-wise, it's an anticipation of a challenge. I'm pretty fresh as a consultant. I'm 4 months in. So I was very lucky to land a fellowship doing the exact type of work I want to do for the first 6 months of this. I've been doing some other projects along the way as well with some other consultancies. So I've been doing work that I'm excited about. For me, I think a challenge is it's essentially like the marketing work, right? It's identifying what work will be in the pipeline and how far out I need to be doing some of that work and exactly what I want to be doing. I'm very relationship based. I'm very involved in design and food systems and active member of many networks. And so pretty much everything is word of mouth at this point, and maybe that's okay for a longer period of time. I don't know, but it's an open question that I have.
Okay, great. And do you feel like if somebody asked you today, I mean, I did ask you this today, but if we were actually like at a cocktail party or something, and I was just like, oh, nice to meet you. What do you do? And you were just going to give me a conversational, 5, 6, 7 word answer, what would you say?
And this is probably actually, you're nailing one of my biggest challenges, is explaining this to somebody who doesn't know. So I will say that right now. I think that is the biggest challenge. I would say, yeah. Well, I do have an answer. I just think it turns into like 7 follow-up questions, which might be okay, but it's not, summarizing it briefly. I would say that I think what I mentioned earlier, I help organizations that are tackling, strategic and programmatic challenges to identify impactful solutions using equity-driven design. Inevitably, the next question is, well, what is that? If they don't know. Right. However, many people do. Some people do. But if you ask my parents, I've explained it to them 7 times. So it comes up as a question.
Right. Yeah. And I already can't remember what you just said. So it's there's definitely an issue there but it's a great starting point because it's really clear. It's just not memorable. So and the beauty of having a memorable answer is that, especially because word of mouth is great. Referrals are great if you're getting enough of them. Yeah, I wouldn't want that to be my only source of leads, but it's a really good one. It's the best one probably in terms of likelihood of closing the deal and working with clients that you really want to work with. So it's great. You can dramatically increase your word of mouth, referrals, and other kinds of sharing by having a really memorable answer to that question. So, so you've got clarity in your own mind, and I get the clarity. I feel the clarity too, but it's all the words that you used are just giant. They're huge. They're like way up in the air.
So jargony.
It's, yeah, and abstract. It's not. I mean, you did have to explain a couple of terms to me earlier in our little chat, but now that I heard them all and I get it, I do get it. But it's I couldn't repeat it, So, and I didn't have a Rolodex moment. That's the most important thing. So I didn't think, oh, I know who I should introduce Lucy to, because everyone, including your parents and people who don't know what equity-driven design are, or even what you mean when you say food systems, they might be thinking Juicero, right? Like who, right? It's like what altitude are you operating on? So, but if you could have something in there that people, especially about your ideal buyer or at least a target market or some kind of target organization, that would allow someone who doesn't understand everything that you do, but understands that you help this particular person ideally, but perhaps this kind of company with a particular expensive problem. And you actually touched on this earlier because you said that companies that you work with, or at least there are companies who have a problem but don't know that this is a potential solution for it. And they might reach for different tools to solve the problem, perhaps not even, perhaps worse tools. So I know it's in there. I know there's something in there. I know there's a problem in there because you already said there was. And even if you picked an organization or an ideal buyer, however you would describe it, that's reasonably tangible, so that you could pour gasoline on word of mouth from people who don't need to understand everything you do, but at least need to know who you would like to be introduced to, then you can really, it's super helpful. It's much more memorable. It's much more, there's like an action that they can take to help you. So if you're a part of whatever kind of networks, family networks, church networks, trade association networks, just friends hanging out on whatever Instagram, and they know you help target market with expensive problem, it makes it so easy for them to just go through their brain and their mental Rolodex and say, oh, I know someone that I like, and I like Lucy, and maybe I should introduce them because she helps people just like my friend Bob with this kind of problem that he may or may not have, but at least we know what it is. So, and the hard part with this, usually the hard part with this is boiling down, you're operating like at a mission level, and boiling it, like global warming is bad. Everyone agrees. But who wants to, but you're running a business, so you need people to write checks. And I can't imagine anyone writing a check to anyone who just says, I solve global warming, or I help you with global warming. It's like, I don't believe it. It's too big. It has to be more specific. It's like not a, I help people with global warming. It's not a business. It's a mission. And that's great. It's super helpful. And you've got loads of that. It's like everywhere in your conversation. So what are some, if you were going to make a list, maybe not just one, but if you were going to make a list of types of either ideal buyers or target markets who you could probably help, if they have this particular kind of expensive problem, you could definitely help them. So you mentioned hospitals already. Is that, let's just
Yeah.
we workshop that a little bit and just see like what
Yeah,
inside.
let's do it.
Cool. So who in the hospital is the most likely person or the highest level person in the hospital who would be likely to start a conversation with you, or you believe is the one you should be talking to?
This is an interesting question, in part because I haven't done any real research on this yet, but also because the nature of the way food is viewed sort of in the U.S. and in the systems it operates in, it's often separated from the institution where it is provided. So an example, I worked in school food for years, like nationally, and people don't think about education as being a place like where food is connected, right? Even though millions of kids eat school breakfast, lunch, and supper at schools. And from the hospital perspective, I don't know if that person is somebody within the food service department because it's kind of siloed within a hospital system. Yeah. I think that's part of the problem that from the outside, I think is going on about why hospital food by and large is so disconnected from health and healing, right? But it might be, I would imagine that if a hospital was actually interested in this topic and wanting to redesign or reimagine how it's integrated into their institution more broadly, it's probably someone higher up who is able to connect from like this internal silo of school or food nutrition to the rest of the hospital. So somebody probably high up is what I would guess, or somebody who's involved potentially in operations, but I don't know for sure.
That'd be my guess. I don't know either, but that would be my guess. Either COO or CEO or whatever the equivalent is in a hospital, or maybe even someone on the board. So so I definitely agree. I think for something, the stuff you're talking about is so huge, and it's not the kind of thing it's not the kind of thing that probably would be addressed easily or even effectively in a grassroots bottom up kind of way. It feels like it would be very top down, where someone with a real big thinker at the top would need to say like, yes, this is important. It's going to be our, strategic goals for 2023 are to, connect nutrition and wellness and have this sort of holistic approach to the entire hospital experience, let's just say. So yeah, it's pretty much
right.
good. It's got to be somebody way up.
Or I guess one alternative though is that you have some very large companies like an Aramark or a Sodexo that does food service in stadiums and schools and prisons and hospitals as well. So it could also be like an internal goal from one of those food service management companies, and they're trying to align with the hospital. That could be the other alternative, I think.
Yeah. And what did you call? What's that category of company?
I call it a food service management company. So they get hired by other institutions to operate within the setting, whether it's, a football stadium or a hospital.
Are there any that, this might be tough to answer on the spot, but do you happen to know if any of these, if there are any food service management companies that are niched down on just hospitals and don't do arenas or don't do prisons or schools?
That's a good question. I don't know. I would imagine some hospitals have self operations. They run their own, but I'm not sure if there's a specialization in hospitals. Something to look into, though.
Yeah, it would be interesting because I agree with you. I think it could be for people who are competing in the food service management space. There's usually always someone looking to differentiate themselves, like maybe the second tier. Maybe there's a 400-pound gorilla, and then a disruptor that wants to get more market share or justify premium fees. Maybe it's become a commodity priced sort of thing, and everybody's racing to zero, and someone has got a big picture idea like, okay, if we could really differentiate ourselves, we could command a premium. So it could be, I agree, it could be a competitive advantage for someone in the food service maintenance space, especially a disruptor or someone who's in second place. Like, we try harder because we're because we're number two. So
Yeah.
that might be interesting, or even some boutique ones. I imagine there again, these sound like even the small ones would probably be pretty big companies. But that would be interesting to kind of, I would spend a little bit of time looking around and say like, okay, at one of these trade association events, which surely they have some kind of events like conferences or some sort of get-togethers annually.
Hmm.
Who's sponsoring those? I'd be curious who in the food space is sponsoring to either be at a trade show or otherwise get in front of their buyers. That'd be very interesting.
Yep. I think you're right.
Okay. Um, the school thing really captured my imagination because so many people have experience with that. I mean, everybody, I suppose, has some experience with the hospitals, but nothing compared to schools. And then what was the other thing you mentioned? The food. Let's jump over to the sell by date.
Mm-hmm.
Who's the customer there, or is that global warming? Is there's no one customer, or is it a trade association, or like who do you think would be the in a position to take action on your advice and make an implementation of that work?
That's a really good question. I'm not sure who dictates the sell by dates. I know that there's like a lack of consistency in terms of regulation. So I don't know when they're required and when they're not. I know that some companies do it, like offer it themselves. So they might be using a different method for identifying that date versus another company. But I would look into who oversees that, if anybody, and what level, whether it's federal or state,
Right.
and what policies regulate it. So it depends. But this could be the type of thing that ends up being not so much a business that funds it, but it's like, it could be a state agency that's interested in doing some work around it, and that would be
Right.
a government project.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, like, would it be like completely crazy to imagine the FDA being one of your clients?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think it'd probably be the USDA. I could be wrong on that.
Sorry.
But
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
I don't.
You're right. USDA.
Yeah, I don't think it would be. I think that's totally reasonable.
Okay. Cool. And you mentioned a fellowship earlier. Can you explain what that is and how that works?
Sure. Yeah. So this is. I applied for an equitable design fellowship with a research and design firm based in San Francisco, and was very lucky to get it. So that when I shifted from my job of 10 years into my solo work, I was able to step into this position where I'm doing a project that's essentially a passion project that I'm interested in, and I have 6 months to implement that. So that's what I'm doing. And it's, you could call it, I guess, I wouldn't call it a portfolio piece. Like there's something that will come at the end of this that I could say, hey, this is something I worked on, but it's just as much about the opportunity to test out some design practices and ideas and collaborate with a really smart group of people.
That's a great little on ramp. So what's the company's, is the company in the space? Like what's the motivation? What's their motivation for creating the fellowship in the first place?
I think they're interested in kind of an experiment for them. They're interested in seeing what a fellow who brings an equity lens can do in partnership with their team. So I spend a lot of time with their team talking about opportunities and challenges internally with the way they do their design work, and collaborating on, questions that they're answers to questions they're grappling with. In addition to that, their primary focus is on teen and young adult mental health related issues, and the project that I pitched is at the intersection of food and mental health.
Oh, wow, that's great. Okay, cool.
Yeah. I feel extremely grateful both for the on ramp that you mentioned, and just the amount of learning I've been able to do the last few months.
Food and mental health in teens.
Mm-hmm.
You've got me hovering back to the school angle, or anybody.
Yeah, I worked in school food for 10 years. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But maybe it's not, school administrator or system administrator, school system administrators. Maybe it's Cisco or somebody that supplies to those schools, and you've got this amazing street cred of the fellowship where you're going to have more than a portfolio piece, but some kind of in the field result from this, from exploring this intersection. You could even, if it's teens, you could even get more specific and say high schools, maybe colleges too, high schools and colleges. Ooh, higher ed, that's interesting. They're always looking for another
Mm-hmm.
bullet point to put on their brochure. That's very
Mm-hmm.
interesting.
Mm-hmm.
If a university made a name for themselves in this space, maybe the school itself has some history with food. What would that be? That seems that maybe that's a stretch, but if we got specifically, if we just said high school, and you've been in the space, so you would know, is there someone at in the high school system administration somewhere who's the right person? It's not a principal, right? It has to be bigger than that. It has to be it has to be like would it be a state thing or maybe a big private school? Would a big private school care about this?
I think it depends on the thing that we're talking about.
Hmm.
But a district level, if we're talking about public schools, district level, state agencies potentially, if they're interested in topics, for example, mental health and food. Um,
What would that
so yeah,
agency be
I think
called? Like, what's
at
this?
a state agency level, it could be like, I live in the state of Oregon, the Oregon Department of Education and the Oregon
Okay.
Department of Agriculture work together actually on certain things. So I
Hmm.
think it could be either of those depending on the topic and potentially both, since they do collaborate.
Yep. Very cool. And or agriculture. Very cool. As an experiment, if you're going to experiment for, maybe 6 months after, let's say the next 6 months, if you're going to experiment with finding an expensive problem specific to, say, that intersection, one or the other, State Department of Education or Department of Agriculture, what's the problem that they would have where you get on their radar and they go, Eureka, like this is exactly what we've been looking for. I can't believe this person exists. It's like a gift. Like, what's the problem that they're having that would cause them to rush to pick up the phone to call you?
Yeah. Are we still talking about the same specific food related topic?
Yeah. If your specific skill, your horizontal skill is equity driven design, if you're an equity driven design strategist and you're interested in applying that particular skill, which could be applied to any vertical, to
Mm-hmm.
the intersection of food and teen and mental health for teens. So imagine if you were going to do a TED talk and it was about the intersection of the effect of food on teens' mental health. And that's your TED talk.
Mm-hmm.
That's your book. That's your research. And it comes to the attention of the head of the State Department of Education in Oregon. What is the problem they have that would cause them to rush to contact you?
Yeah. So I'm making some of this up, right? Because I haven't done like the research on this specific topic and with this particular, like a state agency, but knowing what I know, I could imagine there being something around, the very real mental health implications from the pandemic, right? Like we're reading about it, we know about it. There's initial research coming out about, how, what it's looked like for youth in general and for teens in particular. It's been a really, really, really tough time.
I can't
And
imagine.
I'm
I
sure
know.
the research is behind actually on what the impact has been and how traumatic it has been for teenagers. So it would have to be something I think connected to like what role a state would want their schools to play as a community hub that is supporting teens, from a mental health perspective and being able to draw the line between food and mental health. And I think that could look a number of ways depending on what the actual challenges that they've identified through their own research. So I'm kind of speaking in vague terms here because I haven't done the research myself, but I think that would to me be the most one of the more time-sensitive, urgent issues that is currently facing teens, or rather what teens are currently facing.
Yeah. And like you said earlier, there's probably lots of different tools that someone who has a mandate to improve the numbers of teen mental health could potentially reach for lots of different things that might not be the first thing they think of might not be, we need to do something about the food program.
Yep.
So,
yeah.
right.
Yeah. Or they think about the food program from the perspective of hunger, which is also very real issue right now in the U.S. In terms of the number of teens experiencing hunger. So that in and of itself is a issue that needs to be addressed in schools. I think have a huge opportunity there, but a stronger connection, I think, can be drawn between those two things.
Okay, and I can imagine the answer to this question, but I'd like to hear it in your words. Let's say this was an area. Let's say that I don't know, somebody listening to this knows someone somewhere that is like one of these state administrators and starts a conversation, maybe forwards this over, and they were interested in talking to you. Where does the equity piece come in?
Two main ways. I think it's designing for equitable outcomes. So who are in this scenario, who are the teens most impacted, right? And I would imagine that there are certain demographics that are more disproportionately impacted, for example, by hunger and other mental health challenges for like a variety of reasons. And so it's looking at where, you could say tide raises all boats, but also you got to put a focus on some of those boats, some specific boats, and
the ones that are sinking.
So yeah, right. So like equitable outcomes is one. So designing for that, but also doing the work equitably. So there is it's very easy for somebody to say, I'm just going to go out there and research and get a bunch of information from people and go into the corner and design solutions myself, which may or may not result in actual buy-in over the thing that's produced, right? So I'm a big believer in co-design, and it's about facilitating a process where people who are most impacted by the issues, people who are closest to the issues, are actually involved along the way. So they have great ideas. They know, most intimately what they're experiencing. They're actually involved in the process.
Fabulous. I love that. So true too. Okay. So would you then, are there any kinds of businesses that you would reject working with? Based on what you,
I can say that.
Of course the answer is yes.
Yep.
Are there ones that would maybe surprise listeners? Like I mentioned private schools earlier. Would you be like, no way, I'm staying public sector because those are automatically like just the rich kids? Would you be able to do something equitable in a ritzy private, boarding school?
Yeah, that's a good question. It wouldn't be a priority for me. Let's put it that way. It wouldn't be a priority for me. I'm a big believer in this example, like public education and investing in public education. So that would be my priority. But I think if I'm not talking about schools for a second, we're talking about other types of companies. I identify as like a progressive person. I do not expect, and I know that not everybody is in the same place on their journey towards creating a more equitable future, right? And just because some company or individuals at a company have been doing that work for years and they're like really forward thinking and they're looking to hire someone to do work that they already are aligned with, that's great. I am very open to working with companies that are looking the same direction on that trajectory, but they might be further behind on that journey. That's okay to me. Like they don't, you know what I mean? So like the criteria for me, the most important criteria is people are actually committed to moving in that journey, even if they're in different places on the journey. So I'm not thinking of a specific organization right now that might be surprising, but would I want to work with a soda company? No, probably not. But if there was, another company that maybe they've done some stuff in the past that hasn't been great, but they've got leadership who's really interested in, charting a new path forward, I would be open to that, depending on, how conversations go.
So you do seem to lean much more public sector. Is that fair to say?
Leaning public sector, yes. But I think there are definitely for-profits in the world that, I'm making this up, but let's say like DoorDash. I don't know what challenges they're dealing with. I'm totally making this up on the spot. They're working in the food space. They're a for-profit. I actually don't know really anything about them, but if they had something that they were working on and it seemed like a good fit, I would for sure take that phone call and explore it a bit and see what they wanted to do, what their priorities were, why they were calling me.
Okay, so if you were suitably convinced that some for-profit company was truly mission-driven, it's not food, but if we thought a little hard, we could probably come up with a food example of like Warby Parker or Tom's Shoes, and they donate glasses and they donate shoes, and I don't know, some kind of company in the food space. There probably is one, like I don't know, Charity Water or something. I mean, they're not a for-profit, I don't think,
There
but
probably is, but it doesn't even have to be that. Honestly, if it's just a company that sells food, like that's fine. It's about harmful practices for me in the end. If they're like selling products to somebody, if it is DoorDash and, I really don't know anything about them. So I don't hope I don't get any calls later from
right.
people saying like, I can't
Oh,
believe you're
they're
talking
evil.
about
Yeah.
DoorDash. But, yeah, for me, it's not just about food practices. There's other pieces of their work that I would want to do, like to assess and understand the way in which they move through the world. An example, I can't believe I'm bringing up on a public call like this, but I think is an interesting one. Is well, maybe I shouldn't mention it, but let's just say there's like a really, really big grocery store chain, that had a history of doing some problematic stuff, but was also trying to do some more positive stuff in the world, where I would say they're in like a squishier space for me, where I would say, oh, interesting. Like I've got like me 10 years ago with my viewpoints back then would have said, absolutely not. I would never work with them. Me now, maybe I would. I
Right.
think it depends.
Well, I think it speaks to your point earlier about, joining them where they are in the mission, if they're going the right direction. If you believe that they're going in the right direction, and believe me, I'm not trying to talk you out of this. I'm just trying to find out where the boundary lines are.
Yeah, and
Okay.
I think the other factor for me is recognizing that, and you made a comment earlier on a different topic about sort of like the power of grassroots work.
Mm-hmm.
Food systems, the food system is enormous, right? And some of these companies have enormous influence to change. And I know people who wouldn't step foot into a room with some of those companies, but like I do believe that there needs to be some work done internally in those places as well. So that's a factor too.
Yep. Okay.
Can I ask a question
Sure,
of
please.
you? So it has to do with in thinking about how I describe the work that I do, recognizing that it's across in many ways different sectors that touch the food system. This is an analog that I've wondered about. And in the business world, people know, if you start talking about like McKinsey, people know what you're talking about if you know business. If you do not know business, someone says, I work at McKinsey, I'm in consulting. It's just, you get like this eyes glazed over look. And then they try to explain what they're doing and you still don't get it. And I bring it up because to me, it's kind of similar, right? They work with a lot of different types of companies across different fields. They've got a nonprofit consulting arm that works with nonprofits, again, where they work in different fields and sectors. Yet they have a pretty clear message about what they do as a process. But it doesn't matter if everybody understands what they do, right? And that's very clear because a lot of people don't. In my case, and I could think about that as, an analog in some ways. Well, I guess I'll end with my question, which is, for whom does my business description need to click with immediately? And for whom can I spend a little time explaining it to? I don't think you necessarily know the answer. I think I need to.
No, I do. I have an answer. I know what you mean. Yes. Well,
Yeah.
let me flip it around. Would it be better for you or worse for you if everyone understood it as soon as you told it to them?
Better.
Right. So
Better.
why not strive to come up with language that makes it really easy to understand?
Yeah. Yep,
Are you ever going to get all the way there? Nope. But you probably can get really close. And the thing that you need to get, I think the most helpful thing, especially in the way the world is now, I don't know how old you are, but I'm 53, and there didn't used to be the internet. Now there is the internet. And the idea, it's just unbelievable. Like word of mouth in the 80s was like nothing. It was like nothing. It was huge then, but think of how much huger it is with social media, email. It's huge. Online groups, forums, online events. If you have a really clear target market, you are probably only 2 hops away. Forget 6 degrees of separation. You're probably one person away from a dream buyer. There's probably someone who is friends with or friend of a friend with a dream perfect buyer for you. So if you can arm all of the people who know and trust you with that one piece of information, who does Lucy help? Who does Lucy want to help, even if it's aspirational? That's right there is like, it's like magic. It's like magic.
Yep.
Like if you find the right combination of words that are as tangible as can be and as and easily understood, it's like magic. Everyone says it. Everyone says it when they nail their positioning. That's the word they use. They're like, it's like magic. Like all the stuff I'm doing for marketing is suddenly working. And the thing that I find a little something I say to convince people to always say the same thing, at least when they're starting out with positioning, always say the same thing. I help X with Y. And don't judge the person you're talking to that they're not smart enough to understand that, or they're not worldly enough to know what those words mean. It's rude. So why would you say something different to, not you, I'm saying this to the public. Why would you, everyone, introduce yourself differently to different people? It's because you're judging them. So stop judging people. Tell them what you do. And if they don't know what that is, don't start explaining it before they ask. Just say, I'm a dog lawyer, and let them say, what's that? You gotta find a good way to say conversationally what you do. It's usually like 6 words. It shouldn't be too many. It's like 6 or 7 words. And the joke I make is like, if you can describe $100 million Hollywood movie in 15 words, like anyone listening to this can describe what they do for their ideal buyers in fewer.
Yeah. Yep. I see what you're saying.
And it's not, and when you read that blurb about a movie, you go through Netflix, it's like, they're just short. They're like two lines. And of course, that's not the whole movie. Of course it's not. It's just enough information to get you interested and start thinking about it. For you and everyone who's like a solo consultant or a small firm, you need to leverage that word of mouth. Like that's your outside sales force. They trust you. They love you. They know you're good at what you, maybe they don't know if you're good at what you do. Maybe they believe you're good at what you do, but they know you're not going to screw anybody. They know your heart's in the right place. They trust you, and they have people who trust them because they have a relationship, and people love matchmaking. So if you give them enough information so that they know who you're looking for, then they will do it. So, you don't have, people like us aren't buying billboards and jumbotrons and blimps. We can't,
right.
we're not like MetLife. So we're not doing these big brand advertising campaigns in Harvard Business Review or wherever. So we really need to leverage that word of mouth, which also leads to other things like effective marketing. If you've got word of mouth figured out, then all the other stuff you do in social media or email lists or podcasting, it'll automatically have that same extra energy. So I know I kind of dodged your question and turned it around, but coming up with a way that you can explain what you do in plain English, no jargon, in a way that will resonate with your mom so that she can be like, oh, I know someone I should introduce you to, whatever that thing is. All right, I'll stop.
Yeah. Yep. I'm totally on board with that. That makes a ton of sense. And I'm also just thinking to myself how important those figuring out the right words, not so they're just plain English, but so it also gets as specific as you can be with a few words. Like I'm, like just a short description of the movie The Shining could be like a family goes on vacation for the winter. Like, how do you make sure that you're actually getting at exactly what you do in a few words makes a lot of sense to me. Right.
I mean, again, the most important thing isn't really what you do. If by what you do,
right, what you're helping companies with.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. So, because the person you're talking to will know whether or not they know somebody in that space, and the person in that space who they introduce you to will know whether or not they have that problem. And if they have that problem really, really bad, if for whatever reason they are highly motivated to write a check to make it go away, they won't care if you wave a magic wand or if you do interpretive dance or how you do it. But if this person who I trust says that you can make this problem go away for people like me, I want to get on the phone and I want you to tell me all about it. That's your opportunity to get into the details. But yeah, you're right. You want it to be accurate enough so you're not attracting people who you don't want to work with, because then that's just a waste of everyone's time. So you do need to have a certain degree of specificity. And you could even have, I think it's sometimes a good idea, because it's a real good shorthand, to potentially have some industry specific jargon in the problem. So, because then that will immediately identify you as an insider. So it's tough for me to come up with an example for your space, but the idea is that, for example, if someone's positioning was, I help professionals with, I don't know, I help professionals increase their number of clients. That's going to be off-putting to doctors specifically because they don't have clients.
Mm-hmm.
But if you said, I help professionals get more patients, now all of a sudden it's like, okay, this is someone in the medical space. Someone, she helps people somewhere in, could be dentists, could be psychiatrists, could be MDs, don't know. But you could get, obviously, you could get more specific and say, oh, I help concierge doctors get more patients or get better patient compliance, something like that, where people are just,
Right.
yeah. So if you can, and I'll shut up after this last one. The other thing that always comes up when people are talking about this and how specific should I be, there are restaurants near my house. There's one in particular called McBride's Pub, and out front they have one of those A-frame like sandwich board signs on the sidewalk, and it's like a blackboard, and they always only ever put one thing on it. It's like in the summer it'd be like ice cold Bud Lights inside. It's like they have 200 beers on. There's like obviously they have more inside, but if the offer is the idea is you want to take someone who's not thinking about you and just sort of walking by a stranger, and you want to attract their interest with the thing that they're probably thinking about right now. That's what people say, when people say join the conversation in their head, it's like start there. And it's like, summer heat got you down, ice cold Bud Light inside. It's like, yeah, the summer heat does have me down. Maybe I should. And then you go inside.
Yeah.
Now, once they're inside, and the parallel here would be like a sales interview. Once they're inside, the bartender or the server can walk me through all my options. But I know that the pain that I'm currently experiencing, I'm too hot and I'd like to get something cool to drink. That's true, and I know it right then. But it doesn't need to reveal, like you wouldn't want to put the entire list of 200 beers on the sign because it would be too small and I just walk past it. It's not specific enough. You're asking way too much of the stranger passing by. You're asking way too much for that. If you give them too much information, it's unrealistic. So if you can pull out the thing that I say it all the time. It's like help people you like get what they want. If you can find people you really like, the people you really want to work with, define however you want to define it, and a bunch of them, or even enough of them, want this one particular thing, and you can help them get it. That's what should be on your sidewalk. That's the sign you put out front. That's the thing you say when somebody says, "Oh, what do you do?" And then once a conversation is going, you can get into your process if you want. You could just answer their questions. And then it's not like pitching. It's not like trying to educate them. That's a waste of time.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there time for one follow-up question on this?
Please. Yeah. As many as you want.
So that all makes perfect sense to me. I recognize that the types of projects I would be interested in working on are kind of all over the place, right? Because again, it's the same approach and process that can be applied to so many different things. In thinking about this approach, like the sandwich board approach here, is the idea that this is, or would the idea be to create that short, pithy pitch language for sort of like almost like inbound companies and organizations that are exploring, whether it's my LinkedIn or my website, to learn what I do, while recognizing that there might be some types of projects that wouldn't, or some companies or organizations that wouldn't necessarily see themselves in that, because I have to get somewhat narrow here, right? Like I can't just say like any organization that touches the food system, like that's far too broad.
Yeah.
But can I simultaneously be going after projects? So for example, if I find something that fits in different types of, like a DoorDash in a hospital and a few other places, like they fit into this thing that I come up with, this language I come up with. And also on the side, I'm really interested with some collaborators on trying to like partner with a state agency on figuring out how to destigmatize food benefit programs, which is something I'm very interested in, but would probably not fit clearly or obviously within my sandwich board language. Is like, do people do both of those things at the same time? Do they go after some of the projects that might not, fit in, because government agencies generally aren't doing research to try to find, a company like mine to solve sort of an issue that they're grappling with? They usually put out, they have RFPs and things like that. They're trying to bring people in to their world rather than going out into sort of the world of another company. Can those both of those things happen at once?
Not real effectively. So I'm gonna reframe the question a little bit. If you did come up with a sandwich board quote question, a heck yeah question, where your ideal buyers are gonna say, heck yeah, I'm hot right now. Bud Light sounds great, and they go inside and maybe they buy something else. But you at least got their attention and started a conversation. If you didn't have any if you didn't have any things in play right now, like you weren't already in the middle of pitches and proposals and those sorts of things, if you're just
Mm-hmm.
starting from scratch right now, why wouldn't you? Why would you go outside for, let's say, for 6 months? I'm going to try and go after the head of the state board of education in every state, and then you change your LinkedIn headline to I help whatever state education leadership with expensive problem, and you just connect with every single one of them. You connect with people who are, second in command in those departments. You create content for those exact people about that exact problem. And you did that for 6 months. You probably wouldn't need to be scrambling for every old thing that's a possible that comes your way. And this is where, I mean, this might seem like it's out of left field, but this is why strategy is important. Because if you've got an objective and you decide on a strategy for reaching that objective, the strategy becomes a litmus test for what things are opportunities and what things are actually distractions. So
Mm-hmm.
here's how it plays out. So because here's what happens even if you don't do outreach to people outside of the target market that you are targeting, and you just like throw your line in the water everywhere in the ocean. You're zipping around with your boat to every spot. Like, let me try over here. Let me try over here. Let me try over here. And even if you don't do that, even if you're super focused and you only do inbound content marketing and brand and all of that to attract a particular kind of buyer, and you do outbound just to that kind of buyer and everything's totally aligned, you're still going to attract people from adjacent industries because they're going to talk. So they're going to hear about you and they're going to come to you anyway, and they're going to say, I know we're not in your target market and you don't usually work with people like us, but I really think that you could help us. Would it be okay to get some time on your calendars, or any way we could do that? Like, they're apologetic almost, which is great framing for you. So you get on the phone call, and then you're like, yeah, I could actually help these people. So now you have to ask yourself if this is an opportunity or a distraction, because at the end of this engagement, they might give you a glowing testimonial that you can't use on your website because it would wreck your inbound. So do you really want, like, what's your strategy? It goes back to what your strategy is. If your strategy is to start in the public high school space, but then you intend, assuming that works, you intend to broaden out to hospitals next, and then maybe prisons after that, and you're going to do that, and that's your long-term objective, then it makes sense to take on that hospital, even though you're targeting schools, because you'll be able to use that testimonial in 12 months or something. But you don't want to do it all at once. You know what I mean? You don't want to boil the ocean, as they say. You don't want to try and do all of that when you're just trying to get the word of mouth started. You've got this little, not you, I'm switching back and forth between you specifically and the general you, but when people are just starting out and they don't have they're not booked out months in advance, they don't have leads, they don't have so many leads that they have to like be picky and choosy. If you're in that phase where you don't have enough leads to be picky, then the way to get to the next stage is to get laser focused on one particular thing, because you've only got so much. A soloist or a small firm only has so much time and money to be not getting paid to do client work, right? Like, they need to be able to do this marketing stuff, and the magic trick to doing it is being ridiculously focused. It seems counterintuitive, because people are like, well, wouldn't it be smarter to cast a big net in the ocean instead of just fishing in this like barrel of fish? And the metaphor is wrong, because when someone like us is in the ocean, they're not fishing with a net. Like, McDonald's can fish with a net. Apple can fish with a net. We still have our one fishing pole, or we've just a little tiny net, and we're out in the ocean with 3.5 trillion fish, but we can't catch any because the ocean's so big that the fish aren't clustered together. But if we go to a barrel that only has 1,000 fish in it and it's jam-packed, we could pick them out at our leisure. So it's the metaphor isn't big net versus little net. It's big ocean versus little barrel. You've got the same net. So going to the barrel that's full of fish, and which the metaphor, of course, is some kind of watering hole where your ideal buyers talk about business. They talk about this problem, the place where they would talk about this problem that you solve. So I know it's counterintuitive, and it triggers this like fear reflex. People are like, oh, but if I don't fish in the ocean, I'll starve. And it's like the exact opposite.
Yeah. Yeah. And for me, like, it's funny because I'm like, oh, I feel really niche. But as we're talking through this, I'm understanding what you're saying.
Your specialization,
more, it's
you're highly specialized, but you don't have a niche.
Specialized.
Yeah.
Right. This has been very informative and helpful. And for me, it's not a concern about not finding the work. I definitely think it's there. I'm so excited about so many different topics. It's a matter of me, even if it's, not for the long term, it's for the near future, really, really, focusing on a niche. It makes a lot of sense. This has been very eye-opening for me. Cool.
Well, I'm sorry to like talk for so long. I know we went over time. I hope you're not late for anything.
No. This has been such a great learning opportunity for me, and also useful just to talk through with somebody who's not familiar with the work that I do at all, right? Because I actually do work with a lot of people who work in similar spaces, and we're able to talk about things, dive into the conversation really easily. So this has been good practice and feedback as well, of course.
Great. Well, let's say someone out there knows the head of the board of whatever, the school board in Oregon. How should they get in touch with you? Do you have a website they can go to, or LinkedIn, or what's the best way to find you?
Yeah. You could go to studiomagichour.com, and everything links through that website. So you can find my email address there, LinkedIn, etc.
Cool. Studiomagichour.com?
That's right. .com. Mm-hmm.
Great. All right. Well, I'll put that in the show notes for anybody, so if they want to click through and get in touch with you. But yeah, thanks again for being brave and coming on the show. I know it's like probably feels like some kind of a interrogation or something.
No, it's great. I appreciate it. But being vulnerable is always a good practice. So thank you for the time and the feedback and the insights. I appreciate it.
Awesome. All right, folks, that's it for this week. I'm Jonathan Stark, and I hope you join me again next time on Ditching Hourly.